My name is Meira, otherwise known as the official Meira on Instagram. And you may have been following me lately for some news reports and updates on what's going on in a way that to some degree preserves our mental health in as much as is possible. And I've been asked to come and speak here tonight a little bit about having some emunah, building our trust in Hashem during this whole time, and also to share a little bit of my story. So I guess I'll start with how I found out about this whole incident. So I've been traveling. My apartment, I'll get to that story in a second, but my apartment in Israel completely fell through and it was a whole disaster. I got married 2 months ago, and so we decided to get on a flight for the Chagim and hopefully hear better news about our apartment. So Shabbat had come out and I'm a few hours behind Israel, and I open my phone and I have a message from my older sister who is very Shomer Shabbat. So that was weird. She messaged me saying, hey, and I responded saying, hi, are you okay? And she said, have you seen the news? And my heart fell. And she called me and she's freaking out. And she says to me, look, I'm in a bunker with my children. There are terrorists on the loose. The army came to pick up my husband, who's now been drafted, and I don't know where he is. He doesn't have access to his phone. But I just want to let you know that we're alive, we're okay. But we don't know what's going on. We've heard that 50 people have been killed and at least 35 people have been kidnapped. So as somebody who's involved with the news, I thought that was the craziest thing I'd ever heard. Like 50 people don't get killed in Israel and 35 people definitely don't get kidnapped. But my heart dropped and I started to shake. And I was completely and totally paralyzed by fear. Absolutely paralyzed. And I think that was the experience that most of the people had, at least in Israel. It was just a lot of uncertainty and confusion, but also fear. What does this mean? But immediately after that thought of fear, a second thought came in, which was the realization that the world that I'd known up until this point was really about to shift. And I had no control whatsoever over anything that was going on. 35 people kidnapped. How do we even begin to navigate that? How do we even begin to maneuver that from a political standpoint? And I sat down with myself and I took a minute, and it was very, very clear to me. And what I can only say was a moment given to me by Hashem, that I can either be petrified and anxious and scared, or I can understand that this is totally out of my control. And since there's nothing I can do about that, I have to shift into letting Hashem run this show. And that's really what I want to focus on tonight. The importance of us realizing that we don't have any control in our life, and the importance of us understanding that although we can't begin to understand why Hashem does certain things, that he is ultimately the one in the control, and he is ultimately the one that we have to trust and rely on. So I'm going to give you guys a short story that I think about all the time. I think it's a beautiful story, and it helps me as somebody who has high levels of anxiety and insomnia, if you've been following me online. And the story goes like this. It's a woman who has her baby has to get to an office down in Eilat. So if you know anything about bureaucracy in Israel, it's the worst. So her car breaks down and she has to get on a bus and she has to get on another bus, and she gets to the office and the office is closed, and she has the worst day of all time. Finally, she makes it all the way from up north, down south, figures everything out, gets back up, and she arrives home and she is completely exhausted and destroyed and just emotionally a wreck. And her 1-year-old child that she's been holding, when you speak to the woman, you ask her about her day, she tells you that it was terrible and it was the worst day ever. And she doesn't understand how this happened. But when you speak to the child says, today was fine. I was just in my mom's arms all day. And I think about the story all the time, because the truth is that we as a Jewish people right now have a choice, a really important choice in front of us. And that is to either try and control everything that is going on, to live in fear, to live in anxiety, to be checking the news consistently, to want to know, to be totally overwhelmed, to be panicked by the anti-Semitism, the raging anti-Semitism, which I think Florida has been kept a little bit safe from, but I don't know that for sure. But from what I understand, it's not as bad there as it is in other countries. But it's absolute insanity what's going on. Eretz Yisrael is under complete and total attack at the moment, not just in the media, but physically, and the safety of everybody that we know and we love. It is such a tremendously scary time. But we have two choices. We can either be the woman who is going through a lot and taking the stress on her, or we can be the child who has a total understanding of the fact that as long as I'm in my mother's hands, I'm okay. And I've had to hold on to that thought nonstop throughout this entire time, because the truth is I believe that we don't have any other choice. There is no way to fathom and understand what is going on and how this is possible. How this, not just from a security standpoint and a political standpoint, how this happened, but how Hashem's allowing this, and how it just the whole thing has been a very, very horrible and scary time. But we have a choice, and we have a choice that we have to make as Am Yisrael. Are we going to live in that anxiety, or are we going to live in emunah? The truth is, the Torah says pretty explicitly, "Uvachalta b'chaim," a person has to choose to live in the good. We talk about the war of light versus darkness that we're going through right now, good versus evil. It's a narrative online. Israel is the good, Hamas is the evil. But it's not just on a big scale that we're fighting good versus evil. We're actually fighting it on an internal level as well. In every decision that we make during our day, is our response going to be one of anxiety, or is our response going to be one of calmness and bitachon? Is our response going to be one of fear? Is our response going to be one of understanding that Hashem has a plan, even though we can't understand it? So talking about Hashem having a plan, as I mentioned, I got married 2 months ago, or 3 months ago, I think. Today's our anniversary, maybe? Yeah. I got married 3 months ago. And we had an apartment planned, a beautiful apartment in Ashkelon. We both work remotely, so we had thought that we'll live somewhere by the beach and have more space than we could afford to have in Yerushalayim at the moment. And we were so ready. And this apartment it's in a brand new building, so the apartment was supposed to be ready a week after we got married. So we said, great, perfect. During Sheva Brachot, we'll be in Jerusalem. We'll be with my family. That will work perfectly. Anyway, the week after the wedding comes, and the apartment's not ready. And another week passes. And at this point, we've stayed at this house, and we've stayed at this house, and we're we're a married couple, and we're carrying our suitcases, and it's a little bit of a nightmare. And again, we're moving. The apartment keeps getting delayed. And they basically say to us, we have no idea when this is going to happen. So after about a month, in which we also got mono, we decided, you know what, enough's enough. We're getting on a plane. We're going to go for a mini honeymoon for 2 weeks. And hopefully by the time we're back, our apartment will be ready. Anyway, long story short, the apartment never became ready. But it was also the apartment that the footage, I don't know if you guys saw the footage in Ashkelon of some of the terrorists infiltrating. But it was the apartment that was really our building was on the main front of where all the attacks happened in the first few days. And we would have been there. And so there's a huge amount of importance as people to be able to look and to say, we don't understand. Okay, as a newly married couple, me and my husband were going nuts. Why are we stuck in our parents' home? Why don't we have a base? Why do we have to travel? And now looking back, it's the clearest thing ever, because we couldn't have been there. Hashem had a plan. Even if we had no clarity on it, Hashem had a plan from months behind. The fact that we had chosen to go live somewhere like Ashkelon, the whole thing was totally nuts. And Hashem had complete control of the story, and we couldn't see it. We couldn't see any of it. But now we can, and we can only see it retroactively. And so that's really what I want to say to you guys today. It's so easy to believe that we don't have a choice. We must be anxious. We must be fearful. We must be overwhelmed and panicked, and we must be dramatic, and we must share the craziest news and live in fear. But the truth is, we don't. We don't have to live that way. That's a big part of what my platform is about. Trying to simplify this world that has gotten very, very complicated. For those of you who don't know, I run a platform called The Official Me'ira, which happened completely accidentally because I'm a politics nerd, and my friends were all asking me what's going on. So I started posting, and it really kind of exploded in the last few weeks. We have almost 20,000 followers on different platforms, and the platform does something very simple. It takes all the totally crazy noise, the pictures and the videos and the updates, and it simplifies it into a format that everything's just written down in the most calming way possible. And the reason for doing this is not because I was looking to spend my life writing updates on my phone, but the reason for this was because I realized that the media is making a negative choice. The media is making a choice to make everybody more fearful. But we as the Jewish people have an obligation to not live that way. This is the scariest time that I think we as Jewish people have known in our modern history, since the Holocaust, for sure. We're living in a time where anti-Semitism is genuinely celebrated online, and it's petrifying. We're living in a time where they can murder 1,500 people and they could kidnap 229 of our civilians, and people could go around celebrating that. It is not a simple or an easy time to be alive. But that being said, our obligation to choose good, to choose light, is 100 times more important than it ever was before. We, especially as women who have homes and who have children, who have husbands, we can so easily fall apart. We can so easily jump into a place of fear and anxiety. And again, drama. I can't stand the concept of drama. It bothers me a lot. I think there's enough drama going on in our life without us needing to make it 10 times worse for everybody in the world. But I think that our obligation is to choose light, to continue to choose light, and to realize that we have that choice. If you're sitting here and you're listening to me and you're saying, how can I choose emunah over anxiety? The answer is very simply by realizing that you do have the choice. We're so used to believing that our emotions control us that we have to live in fear, and it's not true. It isn't true. The Torah is very clear on this. We know for a fact that Hashem has a plan. We know for a fact that Am Yisrael has survived everything. We know for a fact that as the Jewish people, we need to come together in unity. We need to come together. We need to be strong. We need to support each other. We need to believe in each other. And we have the obligation to do that right now. And so I don't know how much time I have left. I feel like I'm just talking to myself in the screen. It's quite funny, but I just want to leave you guys with one last message. Every person in this room is afraid right now. Every person in this room is confused, and every person in this room has experienced some level of anxiety in the last few weeks. I'm not telling you that you shouldn't feel that. I'm feeling it. We're all feeling it. But I'm telling you that you have the choice to decide to choose a life in which Hashem's plan dictates everything. We don't have control, but we never had control. We had an illusion of control because it wasn't in our face that we didn't have it, right? We walked around thinking, okay, we can walk outside and all our neighbors like us, and people in the shop, they like us, and people will never want to actually kill us. And suddenly that's changed on us. But the truth is we never had control in the first place. And this war has just thrown it into very, very stark contrast. We now realize that the control that we believed we had, it's not true, it's an illusion. It's all in Hashem's hands. And it has always been that way, even though we don't really want to believe it. So that's what keeps me going. That's what keeps me going. The truth, the understanding that if I have no control, then the anxiety and the fear and all of those things are just ways for me to try and convince myself that maybe I do. If I get really anxious about this, then maybe I can change the outcome. If I get really afraid of this, then maybe that will make me feel less like I have no control. But we have none. We never had. Everything has always been in Hashem's hands. And that is our obligation now more than ever. Things are not going to get easier. Iran, Russia, World War III. I'm hoping that that's not the case. But what's going on right now is not going to get more simple. The situation in Israel is not going to get easier. The number of casualties is not going to decline. Hopefully it stays exactly the same, but it's definitely not going to decline. We have an obligation as women to connect to our emunah, to do everything in our power to realize that we have a choice to live with Hashem. We have that choice. And although we like to convince ourselves that we don't have that choice, I can't, I'm anxious, I'm scared, we do have that choice. We have the choice between light and darkness. And we have the choice between light and darkness, not just in big dramatic events like, oh, I'm going to go donate tons of money, I'm going to do big things, but in our home, in our reality, in the smallest areas of our lives. Do we want to act in a way that brings light to our families? Do we want to act in a way that brings light to ourselves? Do we want to act in a way that brings unity to the people around us? Or do we want to act in darkness, out of fear, out of anxiety, allow the narrative that's online to control us, allow the narrative of what's happening in the world to control us? This is not the first and this is not the last time that Am Yisrael has gone through such a thing, and we must hold on to that. We've gotten comfortable in a world in which the Jewish people, for the first time probably in history, have just been accepted as normal. But that's never been our reality. We've never, ever lived like that as a Jewish people. And now what we're experiencing is what all of Am Yisrael has experienced throughout our whole history. The realization that we are different, the realization that we are special, the realization that we as a group of people have to stay together. I posted this thing online the other day, and that's it. I'm gonna wrap up with it. I have a story of a rabbi, and I don't remember the rabbi's name, so if somebody remembers, feel free to tell me. Who got into a taxi. He was obviously Orthodox, and the taxi driver was very, very anti-religious. And so the rabbi comes in and he says, "Hi, brother, how are you doing?" And the man responds and says, "I'm not your brother. Don't call me that." And the rabbi responds and says, "Well, that's not true. My rabbi told me that we're all brothers." So the taxi driver looks at him and says, "Really? Who's your rabbi?" And he responds by saying, "Adolf Hitler." The truth is, all of our small things, all of our fears and all of our lack of unity and all of our hierarchy of who's better and who should be invited and who shouldn't be invited and which part of the Jewish people do I fit into and is it better than the other? It's all rubbish. It's not true. Hamas doesn't care. The world doesn't care. And we shouldn't care either. We have to continue to choose emunah. We have to continue to work forward and move forward in an act of ultimate unity. It doesn't matter how hard it is. You know, the irony of this call is that there's only one person in this world that I have a huge level of conflict with. And this person lives in Boca Raton. And so when I got this message of giving a speech here, I turned to my husband. Again, I'm not a person who likes to fight with anybody, but there is one person. And he said to me, "Okay, you know, it's time to put your actions to words. You know, you can talk about wanting to live in unity, but if there's somebody out there, look at the sign that Hashem's giving you. He sent you a speech that you're going to give about living in unity, about living in achdus, about living in emunah, directly to the community in which you have somebody that you struggle with that." And it's so true. Every single one of us has some area of conflict that we would much rather say, "Okay, I'm going to donate tons of money to soldiers. I'm going to do so much chesed that I can forget about the fact that I don't have unity in my home, that I don't have shalom in my home." And that's our obligation, to live with unity, to go above, litalot, our own personal agendas and issues, and to realize we are in a war for our lives. We are in a war for the lives of Am Yisrael, and the way that we act right now is going to dictate who we are and who Am Yisrael is for the rest of our lives. And so on that note, I'm going to finish. I don't know if we're doing a Q&A, but I really, really hope that you can all, if there's one thing that you take from this tonight or two things that you take from this, you have a choice to live with emunah. Let no one tell you different. Your anxiety does not need to overwhelm you. You have no control. So why would you choose to live in a life in which everything is hard, which everything is stressful? If you can choose to live in a life in which you understand that you have no control anyway and everything is in Hashem's hands. And second of all, please do some act of unity. For me, for all the Jewish people, for the people in Israel, for the soldiers, we know for a fact that unity is what is going to save us through this time. And that's it on my end.